a wonderful pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the space to have this conversation with you and the wonderful Marianne Ismail and you as well, Dilek. I'm so happy to meet both of you and get to know you better in this discussion. I want to speak about the woman life revolution that's taking place in Iran right now and how it's a challenge to Islam and Islamism. And you've all heard of Mahsa Amini. She's a 22-year-old Kurdish woman who was visiting Tehran from Saqqez, Iranian Kurdistan. And as she was coming out of the metro station in Tehran, she was stopped by the notorious morality police. And she was dragged off. And of course, for the morality police, this was business as usual. This is what women face and girls face every day for over 40 years. It is a real-life Handmaid's Tale, the book that was written by Margaret Atwood. And I want to show you some clips of women being arrested by the morality police for you to get a sense of what it actually means for many women and girls in Iran. And this is Mahsa Amini a few hours after she was arrested by the morality police. She collapsed in custody. Women who were in detention begged the morality police to call an ambulance. Over the loudspeakers, they said that she's a great Bollywood actress. It took 45 minutes before an ambulance arrived. She arrived at Castro Hospital, brain dead, and she died a few days later on September 16th. As news of her situation spread, it was two women journalists that brought this situation to light. They have been imprisoned since then, and they are charged with national security. They've got accusations of national security charges against them, and they're still in prison today as we speak. And protesters started gathering right there in front of Castro Hospital, and the protest continued at her funeral. This is her gravestone. It says, "Dear Gina, you won't die, your name will be a symbol." Gina is her Kurdish name because in Iran, Kurdish names are banned from official documents. She preferred the name Gina, her family calls her Gina, and so we are calling this revolution the Gina Revolution or the Mahsa Amini Revolution. And it was at this funeral that the slogan "Woman, Life, Freedom," Zan Zendegi Azadi, or in Kurdish, Jin Jan Azadi, was raised. And it was a slogan that was first raised in Rojava, which is in Syrian Kurdistan. It is a center of feminism in a war zone. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Rojava. Anybody else? Everyone should know Rojava because it is really a beacon of feminism in the world today. And that slogan was raised at Mahsa Amini's funeral, and it became global. It's now known as the Woman Life Freedom Revolution. And immediately after, there were protests across Iran. It was the largest nationwide protest in Iran since the 1979 revolution. Women and girls out on the streets, removing their hijabs and burning their hijabs. The Islamic regime of Iran is going to end via a women's revolution, and I think we're seeing that today. This is a movement that is deeply secular, modern, anti-clerical, and has anti-religious tendencies as well. It's led by a generation of women and girls side by side with men who are demanding an end to Islamic rule and an end to the Islamic regime of Iran. They are the first generation in Iran that have been raised with portable digital technology at their very fingertips. They know what they want and they know how to get their message out to the world. These are some protests that took place at girls' schools in Iran.
یونیستی و دنبال رو میگم این برنامه ریزی
In the protests, they're shouting, woman life freedom, freedom, as well as death to dictator. And of course, the regime met these protests with its usual characteristic brutality, using even weapons of war against civilian populations. They killed over 500 people, 70 of them children, 18 and under. They arrested 18 to 20,000 people, and they've executed a number of people. Just in January and February alone, they've executed nearly 100 young people. This is one of the young women who was killed at the protests.
چه حسی بهتر از این حس که رها و آزاد میشی؟ امتحان تموم شد و اصلا یه حس رهایی، یه حس آزادی، چی بهتر از این؟
نتیجه دیگه وضعیت اقتصادیمون داغونه، فرهنگیمون داغونه دیگه. یه سری محدودیت هایی که مخصوصا واسه زنان خیلی بیشتر مثل حجاب اجباری خیلی خیلی ممنوعیت که واسه پسران نیست.
کلا لیست کنم که بخوام چیکار کنم و چیکار نکنم. یادم فیلم
And you've heard news that they are also gassing schoolgirls at schools, over 300 schools, and the number of girls affected is 5,000. Human rights groups in Iran say that the number of girls affected by this chemical warfare against girls is closer to 7,000 girls. And we know why they're targeting schoolgirls. It is because schoolgirls and this generation have been at the forefront of demanding an end to the regime. And I think just as historically it's the case, also in Iran it's the case that the fight for women's rights is a fight not just against the Islamic dictatorship, but also against Islam and its ideas that hold women to be subservient, and its rules that are based on discrimination and violence against women. As the suffrage activist Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, in the 19th century, the Bible and the church have been the greatest stumbling blocks in the way of women's emancipation. In the Women's Quran that I've authored, I've said that today we can say that the Quran, Islam, and Islamism are the greatest stumbling blocks in the way of women's emancipation. And Dilek said I was an author, but actually the Women's Quran is blank, so I'm not sure if that makes me an author, because I think really when I looked at it, I thought there isn't really anything good in the Quran for women, so I prefer to leave it blank. So I'm not sure I could be called an author of the Women's Quran. And of course, I think, we cannot ignore the reality of Islam's view of women when we are criticizing the Islamic regime of Iran, theocratic rules, because I do think that they're based on Islamic texts, Islamic jurisprudence, as well as the sayings and actions of Muhammad, Islam's prophet. This is an excellent example of what is said every day about women at Friday prayers, events where a lot of people come and clergymen give speeches on what people's perspective should be, and also via television screens in Iran that's fed to the population every day.
تبارک و تعالی چند قسم حیوان خلق کرده. یک قسم حیوان خلق کرده برای اینکه مردم وسیله سفر باشه براشون. اسب، شتر، این حیوانات چارپاست که مردم ازش استفاده میکنن برای سفرهاشون. این یک قسم حیوانه. یک قسم حیوان خدا خلق کرده که وسیله غذای مردمه و اون مثل گاو و گوسفنده که خدا اینها را خلق کرده برای اینکه وسیله غذای مردم باشه. و یک قسم حیوان خلق کرده و اون زنها و خانمها هستن. اینا عین گاو و گوسفند هستن، حیوان هستن، و خدا خلقشون کرده برای استفاده مردها، فقط واسه که مردا وحشت نکنن. این زنها را به شکل خود انسان خلق کرده، اگر نه اینها عین همون گاو و گوسفند و عین همون اسب و شتر و الاغ هست.
تجاوز به حقوق دیگران، بدحجابی ها، اون آرایش کردن ها، اگر هدف این نباشه که من و شما رو تحت تاثیر قرار بده، تو فکر من و شما نفوذ کنه، چه هدفی داره؟
This is why one of the main slogans in this revolution is that you are the pervert, I am the free woman, because everything that women do is considered a perversion, and any woman that's arrested for improper veiling is charged with promoting prostitution and nudity in society. And of course, we know that a lot of these rules do come from the text itself. from the Quran, but also we've got from the Hadith, where Muhammad, Islam's prophet, said that most of those who are in hell are disobedient women. So there's a place for all of us there. Of course, we know, again, I just want to stress that this is not just with regards to Islam. You have the famous Jewish prayer where men thank God for not creating them women. And you can find this misogyny in all religious texts, and not just Islam. I do want to stress that. And I think oftentimes when we discuss, I'm used to having people walk out of my talk, so as long as they don't throw tomatoes at me. I think a lot of the discussions we're faced with when we raise these issues is one that it's a question of misinterpretation. And I think maybe we'll discuss this further when we're having the debate. But I do think that we cannot leave women's rights to the mercy of interpretations. And if it is an interpretation, it is just one of many interpretations. And in reality, it is those in power who make the interpretation. And also, to be frank, I've never found an interpretation put forward by Islamic feminists, which I consider an oxymoron. You cannot be Islamic and a feminist. You can be Muslim and a feminist, just like you can be a man and a feminist, just like you can be a woman and a misogynist. But I think you cannot be Islamic, like Islam cannot be feminist. Islam is anti-feminist, it is anti-woman, as is all religions, in my opinion. Another argument we often hear is about context. They'll say, apostates had to be executed because of the context. It was a question of survival of of the religion, and so those who criticized it had to be put in death. But when you ask, well, what about the fact that there are over a dozen countries today where apostasy and blasphemy are still punishable by death? What about that? Well, that's a context too, because they have to defend the Islamic State currently as well. So there's always the question of context, but it always seems to err in favor of rights violations. Also, I think a lot of deception is used in these arguments. For example, when you raise the issue of stoning, death by stoning, we are told by apologists that there is no stoning in the Quran, but there is in the Hadith, the sayings and actions of Muhammad. And in fact, Muhammad was very lovely. A woman came and begged him to stone her, and he refused. And she came back and begged him again, and he refused. And the third time she came and begged him, he obliged. So again, I'm not sure, how woman-friendly all of that seems. The other thing that we often hear is how it is an offense. We should respect other people's beliefs. And I do think we should respect human beings, but I don't think we should respect every belief. In fact, I think we owe it to women's rights to disrespect beliefs that are misogynist and inhuman. And if it's a question of offense, the reality is that I am offended by religion every day, but that doesn't mean that people don't have a right to believe in religion. And I think it's important that we make those distinctions. You have a right to criticize religion. It's one belief of many others, and I think a very bad one at that. I've always said that religion should come with a health warning like cigarettes. It kills. And I do think that blasphemy and apostasy are important ways of challenging the notions of the sacred that always seems to be against women and their rights. On the issue of distress, just to tell you, I was at we had an event in London where women cut their hair in solidarity with the women's revolution in Iran, and we gathered this hair to go to the Iranian embassy in London to throw the hair on the embassy because they're so scared of women's hair. And the police stopped us because they said it would distress those who work in the embassy. So it is distressing for the embassy to have women's hair thrown on them. But when we speak out against Islam and Islamic laws, we are Islamophobes. And that's an accusation, I think, that is often used to silence and censor dissent. I agree that there is phobia against Muslims, there is xenophobia. We live in an era where asylum seekers and refugees are criminalized, and they are dying in their thousands upon thousands at Europe's border, and people act as if, they are the criminals, where in fact it is the closed borders that is the real crime. But nonetheless, I think we can defend the rights of people to believe what they want. We can defend refugees, we can defend Muslims from attack and discrimination and violence, but at the same time, we should be able to criticize ideas and a religious right movement that is fascism. The Algerian revolutionaries called Islamists green fascists, and that's exactly what they are. And I think in this woman, life, freedom revolution that we're seeing, you can see deep-seated anti-clericalism and anti-religion sentiments. This is the famous turban flying phenomenon that has taken hold of the country and is happening every day in many cities across Iran. This is Kian Pirfalak. He's a 10-year-old who was killed by the regime during the protests. This is his mother at his funeral. This is Mohsen Shekari, one of the young men who was executed for being involved in the protests. This is him blindfolded on his way to being executed. And he's being interviewed by the Islamic regime of Iran's state television, asking what his last will and testament is.
وصیت‌نامه چی نوشتی شما؟
کجا خاکم کنن؟ دوست ندارم گریه کنن سر مزار.
دوست نداری قرآن بخونن، دوست نداری برات نماز بخونن، دیگه
نماز نخونن.
درست.
شادی کنن. آهنگ شاد پخش.
And if you look at, I hope there'll be a few people standing by that time. And if you look at the new revolutionary songs that are being sung in Iran, they have anti-clerical and anti-religious sentiments. Here's one of them. And at funerals and at grave sites, instead of the usual Shia mourning ceremonies, you see people dancing, burning hijabs, and celebrating those who have been killed, including shouting slogans. This is Nowruz, which is the spring equinox. Iran celebrates, well, it's a non-Islamic New Year that the regime tried to ban, but was unable to. This is Nowruz, which was March 20th, being celebrated at Mahsa Amini's grave site. And we see a lot of evidence of bodies rioting. This is graffiti that's found in Iran, which says the body riots. And we see girls showing photos of their bodies in any way that they can in order to show their opposition and resistance to this state and its laws. And something exciting that's come out more recently from Iran are charters that have been issued. One is a charter by 20 trade and civic organizations in Iran. It was issued in February of this year, where it calls for secularism, for the end to Islamic laws, where it calls for the end of executions, torture, and there also on the 8th of March was a charter of progressive women that was issued. And in this charter, which you can find on that link there, iranws.org, you can see that it talks about banning of child veiling, it talks about secularism, an end to polygamy and siqeh, which is temporary marriage that takes place in Iran, the right to safe abortions, equal rights in family law, the right to cohabitation, very, very progressive demands and charters from a generation that is saying no to the Islamic regime of Iran. I'm involved in a campaign that is calling on the United Nations to consider gender apartheid, sex apartheid, as a crime against humanity. Currently, under international law, racial apartheid is a crime against humanity. We are saying that gender apartheid, sex apartheid, should also be considered a crime against humanity, and it is women from Iran and Afghanistan that have brought this campaign forward. I think the reality is that theocracy is a crime against humanity, it is a crime against women. The Islamic regime of Iran, one of the first things it does, and I think Islamists all over the world do this, and the religious right, in fact, all over the world do this, they come for women first, they target women first. And one of the first things that the regime did was try to impose compulsory veiling first on those who work for the government. And their slogan was, you either veil or you're going to be punched. And as a result of this rule that they brought, it was a mass demonstration in 1979 of women, veiled and unveiled, saying that they don't want compulsory veiling laws. And that was the slogan that the regime brought to put women in their place, either veil or be smacked. Today, this Generation Z in Iran is saying neither veil nor a punch, freedom and equality. This is a generation that's saying, till our last breath, freedom and equality. And this is a perfect way to end this talk, is this banner at one of the protests, which says, in the end, even if there is one woman amongst us that survives to dance on your graves, it will be enough. And I think, in a sense, this is a revolution that can change the world. If we remember, with the establishment of an Islamic regime in Iran, we saw the rise of Islamism in contemporary history. It had a domino effect in bringing Sharia law and Islamic states across the globe. If you look at many of our countries in the region, in the Middle East, in North Africa, in South Asia, prior to the establishment of Islamic regime in Iran, it was a very different situation. And I think, imagine how the world will change in a positive way if an Islamic regime, Islamism, one of the pillars of misogyny in this world, is brought down by a women's revolution. And I think what this says to all of us is that if we're for women's rights, if we want to defend women's rights and equality, then defending the women's revolution in Iran is a task that is of urgency for all of us. Thank you very much.